questions.
Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Before we get to your questions, I want to take a moment to tell you what we're going to be talking about today and tomorrow. First of all, two shadowy groups are really pushing the violence that is racking America. One has its roots in Nazism, came out of the Nazis, and it's still active in America. The other has as its core people who are Marxist, Leninist, communists who want to destroy America. Now, they are leading the charge in what's happening to this violence. So you say, who's really behind it? Who wants to defund the police? Who wants to tear down the statutes? Well, groups like Redneck Revolt, the militant wing of Antifa. But who is Antifa? And why do they want to destroy this country? And what is our president doing to crack down on them? That's the first story, and here's Gary Lane to explain.
An angry mob tries to remove the statue of President Andrew Jackson in Washington, D.C. Across the country, cities are buckling to pressure and removing statues of Christopher Columbus. Now, growing calls for the removal of this statue of President Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves.
The left-wing mob is trying to demolish our heritage so they can replace it with a new repressive regime that they alone control.
The Department of Justice says left-wing groups, including Antifa, are leading instigators of protest violence. But who is Antifa? It's an anti-fascist group formed originally in Germany in the 1930s. They were Stalinists pledged to combating the Nazis. Here in America, these anarchists are based in the Northwest.
One of their strengths that makes them effective is they stay in the shadows. They don't have a regular headquarters, regular funding. So it makes it much harder to trace exactly what they're doing, and it lets them always claim, oh, well, that isn't us, and you can't prove it.
According to Scott Walter, president of the Capital Research Center, some recruits seek meaning and significance by opposing authority.
Almost anybody in Antifa is prepared to be violent. That's part of the essence of Antifa, is that you're brave and tough and manly, and you're ready to be violent.
Antifa's militant wing is called Redneck Revolt. One of its main goals, abolish police departments nationwide.
The Redneck Revolt is a group active in some places, also goes by the name the John Brown Gun Club. If you know your Civil War history, of course, John Brown, shortly before the Civil War, tried to have a violent revolt.
An undercover reporter with Project Veritas recently infiltrated the group's North Carolina chapter.
This particular group sees themselves as armed revolutionaries, and they believe in total abolition of everything, including the police. There were multiple chapters of Redneck Revolt that went to Charlottesville and acted as the militia wing of the anti-fascist movement. One of their missions is to arm minorities.
Redneck Revolt invited the undercover journalist to the gun range. Initially accepted as a member, her social media activity led the group to eventually reject her.
I had Facebook posts in support of a candidate for sheriff, and that's where they said to me, that's where we fundamentally disagree. We don't believe in reform of any kind. We believe in complete abolition of the system itself, including police.
So who funds Antifa and Redneck Revolt? Walter says they don't need a lot of money.
How much money does it cost to get a black hoodie, a black face mask, and a couple of bricks, right? You don't need multi-million-dollar grants to do that.
But how about other militant left-wing groups?
And we can find some places where money like George Soros will fund something called the Alliance for Global Justice, and that is what's called a pass-through. It will then pass the money on to individual groups like Refuse Fascism, which was an Antifa-style group that started after Trump was elected.
So what can be done to stop these violent leftist groups? President Trump is set to strengthen a statute against destroying monuments on federal property, which could mean up to 10 years in prison for violators. At least in the case of Antifa, President Trump and U.S. Attorney General William Barr want them designated as terrorists. John O'Connor, a former assistant federal prosecutor for Northern California, disagrees.
You're burning the barn to roast the pig. I don't think you need to do it. I think if they are doing this in order to take advantage of some of the anti-terrorist laws, which are created by statute, I think you've got to show more of a foreign nexus.
And that may be the Trump administration's biggest challenge in combating leftist violence. Overseas support may be hard to prove. For now, it seems these leftist groups, although inspired by foreign movements, are homegrown. They're made in America. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Well, tomorrow we're going to talk about another one. What is the group that has organized something known as Black Lives Matter? The concept is one thing, the organization that started it is something else. And we're going to show you the leadership that brought that about. And it will shock you on tomorrow's 700 Club.
Wow. I think the word terrorist is accurate for what they are doing to our country.
No question. And I said earlier that they were not, they were anti-Nazis coming out of Germany, but they're radicals. They want to destroy everything, defund the police. But that's only part of it. This other thing that we're dealing with that is causing this radical shift in America is, again, this doesn't come out of the Nazis, it comes out of the communists.
Wow.
And they hate America, they want to destroy America, and they've used what seems to be a noble cause, and they have hijacked it, and you've got to understand what's going on. We'll show you on this program, and you probably won't hear it anyplace else, but you'll hear it tomorrow. Well, in other news, Dr. Fauci says we're on track for a coronavirus vaccine by January. But we're not out of the woods yet. As states reopen, cases have been increasing. John Jessup has more on that.
That is right, Pat. The nation's top health experts testified to Congress Tuesday as COVID-19 hospitalizations are up in at least 21 states. But as Caitlin Burke reports, there's also good news on the vaccine front.
A troubling assessment of the state of COVID here in the U.S.
We're now seeing a disturbing surge of infections.
This fall and winter is going to be difficult, and we need to be prepared for it.
Across the country, states are seeing spikes in both hospitalizations and the rate of positive cases. Texas and Florida both seeing surges, and Arizona seeing a record number of new cases ahead of a Tuesday Trump event. Still, thousands packed into a Phoenix megachurch, most taking no precautions.
The person feels like they don't need to wear a mask. I don't think that they should be forced to wear a mask.
America's top infectious disease doctor warning that this type of mass gathering is exactly what people should avoid.
So, plan A, don't go in a crowd. Plan B, if you do, make sure you wear a mask.
Dr. Anthony Fauci and other top health experts testified before Congress Tuesday, explaining that the next couple of weeks are going to be critical. They also addressed this controversial comment made by the president.
When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
In an exclusive interview with CBN's David Brody, President Trump said he never actually made that order.
But just to clear up, there wasn't a direct order, if you will, to staff to stop the testing.
No,
Okay.
but I think we put ourselves at a disadvantage.
Members of the task force confirmed that statement.
None of us have ever been told to slow down on testing. That just is a fact. In fact, we will be doing more testing.
All of us have been and continue to be committed to increasing readily, timely access to testing.
Fauci did have some good news for Congress concerning the status of a vaccine.
And I believe it will be when and not if we get favorable candidates with good results, we will be able to make them available to the American public, as I said to this committee months ago, within a year from when we started, which would put us at the end of this calendar year and the beginning of 2021.
One of the most promising vaccines moves into phase 3 of study next month. Fauci says he's cautiously optimistic. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. Well, can China be held accountable for its role in the COVID-19 pandemic? The Senate Judiciary Committee considered that question Tuesday. Texas Senator Ted Cruz says China is liable for the nearly 500,000 deaths and trillions of dollars in losses caused by the pandemic because of its actions early on.
We know that the Communist government of China actively covered up and silenced early intervention to stop this pandemic. There were heroic Chinese physicians, whistleblowers who stood up and blew the whistle on this pandemic, who stood up and said, this is really dangerous, we need to stop it. And the Chinese Communist government, they came in, they arrested the whistleblowers, they silenced them, they punished them.
The state of Mississippi has filed a federal lawsuit seeking damages from China and expenses and economic losses. Well, the Justice Department is moving to check China's theft of U.S. technology. As Dale Hurd reports, the communist nation's strategic goal is to supplant America as the preeminent superpower and to dominate the world.
China loots as much as $500 billion worth of intellectual property from the United States each year. Everything from military secrets to medical breakthroughs. Some of the Chinese copycats are funny, but some, like China's ripoff of the state-of-the-art F-22 Raptor, are deadly serious. And it's why China is closing the gap in the technology race. China's strategy has been to buy, cheat, and steal its way to global dominance. And so far, it's been working. A 2019 survey found that 1 in 5 North American-based companies had had their intellectual property stolen by China within the last year. Attorney General Robert Barr told Fox News that Chinese espionage and intellectual property theft has become a fundamental challenge to the United States.
So what's at stake is whether we can continue to be the technological leader of the world.
Barr has begun a Justice Department crackdown on Chinese intelligence gathering and intellectual property theft. A top Harvard University professor was indicted 2 weeks ago for lying about his ties to China's Thousand Talents Plan, a program that pays America's best and brightest minds to work for China.
They really are breaking all kinds of laws that are on the books in the United States.
Dr. Robert Farley at the Patterson School of Diplomacy and U.S. Army War College says previous American presidents were naive to think free trade would change China.
It was a really big bet that outreach to China was going to change China politically, and that part of the bet didn't pay off.
But Attorney General Barr says the Chinese looting of the U.S. couldn't happen without the heads of corporate America who want to do business in China.
Because they're willing, ultimately, many of them, to sacrifice the long-term viability of their companies for short-term profit so they can get their stock options and move into the Gulf resort.
And after decades of theft, the Chinese military is now close to technological parity with the United States, at a time when tensions between the two nations are rising. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Pat, and recent reports show that China may likely be among those attempting to hack into American companies working on a vaccine for COVID-19.
Well, all that and more. China used to be called the Middle Kingdom. They really were isolated. They didn't want to go beyond their borders. They were perfectly content to have that huge landmass, and that's what they wanted. But under Xi, suddenly the Chinese communists have become a threat. They want to not only be equal to America, they want to supplant America economically and militarily. And so if a company wants to do business with China, they must give to China their intellectual property. That's where all that trillions of dollars has come from. They have to turn over to them all of their patents and their devices to give it to the Chinese, and then they in turn take that and use it against us. We can't have that. There was a time that I thought this would be the largest Christian nation on earth. There was a wonderful feeling among the Chinese Christians. There was a revival of Christianity in China, and they were marvelous people. But under Xi, there has been a crackdown on Christianity. They've destroyed churches. They have moved against those Uyghurs who are Muslim rather than Christian, but they moved against them for re-education. And it is a vicious dictatorship. And they are our enemies, and they claim to, not only are they moving into the South China Sea, but they want to move to hegemony all over Asia. And we have to stand against it And we've only got one president now who's been willing to do that. But prior presidents have thought accommodation with China, they'll want to get into the World Trade Organization and they'll be our friends. But under this particular communist leader, they have become avowed enemies of America. And they not only want to challenge us economically, they want to challenge us militarily. And there's some thought that they now have weapons that are exceed in their ability that which we have, and they're going to push us. And I promise you now, assuming the president gets reelected in this next election, that he's going to be challenged by the Chinese in ways you cannot believe. And especially it'll start in the China Sea. They're going to be building those little islands out there, and then they're going to be claiming that's part of China, and they'll be moving their forces in there. And then they'll be challenging Japan, and then they'll be challenging Southeast Asia. And the question is, do we want to risk war? And the answer is no, we don't. Mm-hmm. But it's going to come about. So just mark my word, it's something you really want to pray about. Now, there's something we've been talking to you about called the Ring of Fire. The North American plate of the tectonic plate has moved against the Pacific plate. And all around the Pacific, from Santiago in Chile all the way up through Indonesia, Manila, and to the Aleutian Islands and Seattle and on the West Coast and down into Mexico, these plates are shifting, and it's called the Ring of Fire because the Pacific plate and the various North American, South American plates are moving tectonically. Well, John, you've got a report now about a big one that took place in southern Mexico.
That is right, Pat. A powerful earthquake shook southern Mexico Tuesday. The 7.4 temblor hit near the resort town of Hualtuco. It was felt hundreds of miles away in Mexico City, sending people running into the streets. The AP is reporting at least 6 people have died in the quake, which triggered a tsunami warning that was later canceled. Pat, just devastating.
Well, it's one of those things. I mean, we're living in interesting times. Wasn't that a curse? They said, I pray that you'll live in interesting times. Well, we're living in them now. It's not too pleasant. Not only is there a plague of locusts coming across, now we understand there's a dust storm coming out of the Sahara that is threatening the southern part of America and certainly the islands down in the West Indies.
Run to the hills.
It just, I don't know where you run anymore, but these are difficult times. Okay, we've got some fun things now. I say fun, but let's hear what's going on.
Yeah, do. Up next, you called and Pat's about to answer